So there I was, Marcus Fletcher, living my best life as a maintenance worker on Epsilon 7, the galaxy's most boring mining station. And by best life I mean slowly going insane from the monotony of fixing air recyclers and unclogging waste processors. But hey, the pay was decent, the coffee was terrible, and nobody bothered me. Perfect, right? Wrong. It all started when mining shaft 7 collapsed during the night shift. Standard procedure, really. Happens about once a month when some hotshot pilot tries to extract ore too aggressively. What wasn't standard was finding 3 fuzzy, cat-sized aliens in the wreckage, huddled next to their very deceased parent. Now, I should mention that I know absolutely nothing about kids. Human kids are confusing enough with their constant need for food and attention. Alien kids? That's a whole different level of nope. But apparently, the universe has a twisted sense of humor, because the moment I pulled these little furballs out of the debris, they looked at me with their big violet eyes and made this chirping sound that roughly translated to Daddy. Great. Just great. The cubs, because that's apparently what they were, immediately attached themselves to my legs like furry purring barnacles. The first one, who I'd later learn was named Pip, had stripes and an unhealthy fascination with anything that moved. The second, Zara, was solid black with white patches and kept scanning the area like a tiny security guard. The third, Bloop, yes, that's actually his name, was golden brown and seemed convinced that everything in existence was absolutely wonderful. Dispatch, I called into my comm unit while trying to walk with 3 aliens wrapped around my ankles. We've got a situation in Shaft 7, orphaned alien cubs. Send someone who knows what they're doing. The response was immediate. Negative, Fletcher. You're the one who found them. You're responsible until command sorts it out. Standard protocol. Standard protocol, right. Because there's definitely a manual chapter on what to do when alien babies decide you're their new parent. I'd checked. There isn't. Boab waited. So here I was, trudging back to the main station with my new family chirping and purring behind me, wondering how exactly my life had gone from boring to completely insane in the span of 20 minutes. The cubs seemed perfectly happy with this arrangement. Me? Well, let's just say I was really starting to miss those clogged waste processors. 3 days into my unwanted career as an alien nanny, I'd learned several important facts. First, Cathara cubs, that's what the database said they were, eat approximately their body weight in protein paste every 4 hours. Second, they consider my work boots a delicious delicacy. Third, they have absolutely zero understanding of human sleep schedules. Fletcher, came the nasal voice of Station Commander Vex over the intercom at O'Dark 30. Vex was a Rillan, think stick insect crossed with a middle manager who'd discovered the joys of bureaucracy. Report to my office immediately, and bring those creatures. I looked down at my new roommates. Pip was currently stalking a maintenance drone, crouched behind my toolbox with his tiny tail twitching. Zara had somehow figured out how to access my computer and was studying station schematics with the intensity of a military strategist. Bloop was just sitting there, purring, and apparently finding the ceiling absolutely fascinating. Okay, kids, I said, immediately regretting the word choice. Field trip time. Try not to eat anything important. Commander Vex's office was a shrine to efficiency and bad lighting. The man himself looked like he hadn't slept since the cubs arrived, which, considering they'd spent the last 3 nights having what I could only describe as zoomies through the ventilation system, was probably accurate. Fletcher, this situation has gone on long enough, Vex announced, his forearms gesturing dramatically. These are Cathara cubs. Do you understand what that means? I glanced down as Pip attempted to pounce on Vex's shoelaces. That they're really bad at hunting? They're apex predators in training, Vex hissed. Full-grown Cathara can take down creatures 10 times their size. These cubs will eventually reach nearly 3 meters tall and possess natural weaponry that could cut through hull plating. Huh. I watched as Bloop got distracted by his own tail. Terrifying. This is serious, Fletcher. Galactic Child Services is sending a transport. The cubs will be relocated to a proper containment facility where they can be studied and... Containment facility. Something cold settled in my stomach. You mean like a prison? A research facility, Vex corrected, but his eyes couldn't quite meet mine. That's when Zara, who'd been quietly listening to our conversation, made a sound I'd never heard before. It was low, almost like a growl, but somehow sadder. Pip immediately abandoned his shoelace hunt and pressed against my leg. Even Bloop stopped purring. Yeah, well, I said, surprised by the protective edge in my voice. Good luck explaining to Galactic Child Services why you want to cage 3 kids whose only crimes are eating my boots and keeping me awake at night. Vex's antennae twitched irritably. They're not children, Fletcher. They're predators. I looked down at Pip, who was now chewing thoughtfully on my pants leg, and Zara, who was giving Vex a look that clearly said she understood every word and was planning accordingly. Bloop had discovered Vex's desk plant and was gently pawing at the leaves. Right, I said. Absolutely terrifying predators. I can see how you'd be concerned. 2 days later, just as I was getting comfortable with my new role as the galaxy's most underqualified babysitter, the universe decided to throw me another curveball. I was in the middle of explaining to Pip why he couldn't disassemble the coffee machine when the station's proximity alarm started screaming. Incoming vessel, the automated system announced, in that annoyingly calm voice it used for everything from supply deliveries to imminent death. Unknown configuration, requesting docking clearance. Through the observation deck windows, I watched a ship I'd never seen before glide toward our docking bay. It looked like someone had crossed a fighter jet with a very angry bird of prey, all sharp angles and predatory curves. The Cubs, meanwhile, had gone completely still, not the usual planning mischief still, but statue still. Their ears, if you could call those fuzzy triangular things ears, were perked up and rotating, like radar dishes. Guys, I said, everything okay? That's when the docking bay doors opened and in walked something that made me immediately understand why the database classified Kythara as apex predators. Picture a lion. Now make it 7 feet tall, give it opposable thumbs, and dress it in what looked like battle armor that had seen way too much action. Oh, and add scars. Lots of scars. This was clearly what Pip, Zara, and Bloop were going to grow up to be, assuming they survived their current hobby of trying to electrocute themselves on power conduits. The massive Kythara warrior swept into the common area where we were sitting, his violet eyes scanning the room until they locked onto the Cubs. Then he did something I wasn't expecting. He sat down on the floor and made a soft chirping sound. The Cubs looked at him. Then they looked at me. Then in perfect unison, they scurried behind my legs. Oh, come on, I muttered. The warrior, who had to be their father, tilted his head in what I was learning to recognize as Kythara confusion. He chirped again, more insistently this time. The Cubs pressed closer to my legs. Pip actually climbed up to my shoulder and wrapped his tiny arms around my neck. You have got to be kidding me, I said. The warrior stood slowly, and I realized just how intimidating he was when he wasn't trying to communicate with Cubs. When he spoke, his voice was like gravel in a blender, but surprisingly articulate. I am Ragnar of the Northern Pride, he rumbled. I have come for my offspring. Right, great. Nice to meet you, I said, trying to ignore the fact that Zar was now practically hiding inside my jacket. I'm Marcus. I've been, well, babysitting, I guess. Ragnar's eyes narrowed. They do not come to me. Yeah, I noticed that. This is unusual. Tell me about it. We stood there for a moment, 2 very different species united in our complete confusion about child psychology. Ragnar looked like he could bench press a shuttle, and his own kids were treating him like a stranger. Meanwhile, they'd apparently decided that the guy who couldn't even keep his coffee machine working was their new favorite person. Perhaps, Ragnar said carefully, you could explain why my Cubs choose a soft, furless biped over their own sire? I looked down at Bloop, who was purring contentedly against my leg while eyeing his actual father with polite but distant interest. Your guess is as good as mine, big guy. What followed was the most awkward family therapy session in galactic history. Ragnar spent the better part of an hour trying to coax his Cubs out from behind me, using increasingly desperate tactics. He brought out what looked like alien catnip. The Cubs sniffed politely and retreated further. He demonstrated some impressive hunting moves. Pip clapped but stayed firmly attached to my shoulder. He even tried singing what I assumed was a traditional Kythara lullaby, which sounded like a garbage disposal having an existential crisis. Nothing worked. Finally, Commander Vex arrived with a security detail and that smug expression that meant he thought he was about to solve everything with bureaucracy. Excellent, Vex announced, his forearms clasping together. Now that the biological parent has arrived, we can resolve this situation properly. The Cubs will be returned to their father and Fletcher can get back to his maintenance duties. Ragnar and I exchanged a look. It was probably the first time in history a human and a 7-foot-tall apex predator had shared a moment of mutual, "This guy doesn't get it, does he?" It is not so simple, Ragnar said slowly. Among my people, when Cubs choose their guardian, that choice must be honored, but the guardian must prove their worthiness. Oh, great, I muttered. Let me guess, trial by combat. 3 trials, Ragnar confirmed. Hunting, combat, and wisdom. Vex's antennae started twitching frantically. This is highly irregular. I cannot authorize. You cannot authorize the custody of Kythara cubs without understanding Kythara law, Ragnar interrupted, and suddenly the temperature in the room seemed to drop about 10 degrees. Unless you wish to create a diplomatic incident? I had to admire Vex's survival instincts. He backed down faster than a deflating balloon. Fine, he said. But I'm observing, for official records. And that's how I found myself an hour later in the station's cargo bay, facing 3 trials that would determine whether I got to keep 3 alien kids I'd never asked for in the first place. The irony wasn't lost on me. The first trial is hunting, Ragnar announced. He'd somehow procured what looked like traditional ceremonial gear, a spear that was taller than me, and a set of tracking equipment that belonged in a museum. You must demonstrate your ability to provide sustenance for the pack. I looked at the spear, then at the cubs who were sitting in the front row like they were watching their favorite movie, then at Commander Vex who had his recording device out and was practically vibrating with bureaucratic glee at the thought of watching me fail spectacularly. Right, I said. Hunting, got it. I picked up the spear, nearly dropped it because it weighed about as much as a small shuttle, and looked around the cargo bay. What exactly was I supposed to hunt here? Space rats? Dust bunnies? That's when inspiration struck. I walked over to the corner where we kept the vending machine, the good one that dispensed actual protein bars instead of cardboard rectangles. I fed it my credit chip, selected Kythara Nutrient Blend, and waited as it dispensed 3 perfectly balanced meals. There, I said, presenting the meals to Ragnar. Hunted, killed, and prepared. The mighty vending machine never saw me coming. Vex snorted. That's cheating. Is it? Ragnar examined the nutrient bars thoughtfully. He identified the location of sustenance, overcame the guardian mechanism. He gestured at the credit chip requirement, and successfully provided appropriate nourishment for 3 cubs. Among my people, intelligence in hunting is valued above brute force. The cubs seemed delighted with this logic. Pip chittered approvingly while Zara gave me what I was learning to recognize as her "I'm proud of you" look. Trial 1 passed, Ragnar announced. The second trial was combat, which I was significantly less confident about. Ragnar handed me what looked like a practice sword, though it was still sharp enough to cut through steel plating. You must demonstrate your ability to protect the pack, he said, taking up a position across from me. Now, I should mention that my combat experience consists entirely of one self-defense class I took in college and a memorable bar fight on Kepler Station that I definitely lost. Ragnar, meanwhile, looked like he'd been fighting since before he could walk. This is going to go well, I muttered. Ragnar lunged forward with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for someone his size. I did the only thing I could think of. I tripped over my own feet and fell backward. His blade whistled through the air exactly where my head had been a split second before. I rolled to the side as he spun around, managed to get my sword up just in time to block his next strike, and promptly lost my balance again. This time I stumbled forward, accidentally shoulder-checking him in the knee. Ragnar, who had been expecting me to go backward, wasn't braced for a forward impact. He staggered. I windmilled my arms trying to stay upright, and somehow my practice sword ended up pressed against his throat. We both stood there for a moment, breathing hard. "Uh-huh," I said. "Unconventional," Ragnar mused. "But effective. Trial 2 passed." Vex looked like he was about to have an aneurysm. He fell down, twice. "Sometimes," Ragnar said with what might have been amusement, "the best strategy is the one your opponent cannot predict." The third trial was wisdom, which honestly seemed like the most impossible one. How exactly was I supposed to demonstrate wisdom when I'd been winging this entire parenting thing from day one? "Present the cubs with a moral dilemma," Ragnar instructed. "Show how you would guide them toward the correct path." I looked at Pip, Zara, and Bloop, who were watching me expectantly. A moral dilemma. Right. What kind of moral dilemmas did alien predator cubs face? "Okay," I said, sitting down on the floor so I was at their eye level. "Let's say you're exploring the station and you find a restricted area. The door is locked, but Pip, you've figured out how to override the security system. Zara, you know that going in there could be dangerous. And Bloop, you just want everyone to be happy. What do you do?" The cubs looked at each other. This was clearly a scenario they'd actually encountered, probably multiple times. Pip chittered something that sounded suspiciously like "override everything." Zarin made a more cautious sound that I interpreted as "assess the risks first." Bloop just purred and looked between his siblings. Right, I said. So Pip, your first instinct is to explore, which is great. Curiosity is how we learn. But Zara's right that we need to think about safety first. And Bloop, wanting everyone to be happy is important, but sometimes being a good friend means keeping your pack safe, even if they don't like it in the moment. I paused, realizing I was actually giving parenting advice to alien cubs while their warrior father and a bureaucrat watched. The compromise, I continued, is that we ask an adult to help us explore safely. That way Pip gets to satisfy his curiosity, Zara knows we're being cautious, and Blue knows everyone is taken care of. Make sense? The cubs chittered among themselves for a moment, then Zara, always the serious one, nodded solemnly. Even Pip seemed to accept this logic. And, I added, if you ever override security systems without asking me first again, I'm putting child locks on everything in my quarters, including the food dispensers. Pip's eyes went wide with horror. Apparently, the threat of restricted snack access was universal. Ragnar was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Trial 3, passed, he said. You show wisdom beyond your years, Marcus Fletcher. The cubs have chosen well. Just as I was starting to think this whole situation might actually work out, the station's alarm system decided to remind me that the universe has a terrible sense of timing. Red lights started flashing, and that obnoxious klaxon that meant everything is about to go horribly wrong echoed through the cargo bay. Attention all personnel, came the panicked voice of Lieutenant Torres from the bridge. We have multiple unidentified vessels approaching. They're not responding to hails, and they're jamming our communications. All security teams to stations. Vex's recording device clattered to the floor as he fumbled for his comm unit. How many ships? What's their configuration? 17 vessels, sir. They look like pirates. Ragnar's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The ceremonial atmosphere vanished as his warrior training kicked in. Pirates, he growled. They come for the cubs. What? I scooped up Zara, who had immediately gone into high leap mode. Why would pirates want... Gitara cubs are worth a fortune on the black market, Ragnar explained grimly. Exotic pets for the wealthy. Status symbols. The cubs are too young to defend themselves properly. Over my dead body, I said, surprising myself with the venom in my voice. Ragnar looked at me with what might have been respect. Perhaps it will not come to that. The station shuddered as something impacted the hull. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in an ominous red glow. Through the cargo bay's observation windows, I could see sleek, predatory ships latching onto our docking ports like mechanical leeches. They're boarding, Vex squeaked, his forearms flailing. Multiple breach points. Security teams are responding, but... The lights went out completely for a moment, then emergency power restored basic illumination. In the distance, I could hear the distinctive whine of plasma weapons and shouting voices. The ventilation system, I said suddenly. I know every maintenance shaft on this station. We can use them to move around without being detected. Ragnar nodded approvingly. A sound strategy. But we will need more than stealth. That's when Pip did something that made my blood run cold. The little guy had been sitting quietly on my shoulder, but now he was making a sound I'd never heard before. A low, thrumming growl that seemed to vibrate through his entire body. His tiny claws, which I'd thought were just for climbing and general mischief, extended to their full length. Zara joined in, her tactical mind clearly working overtime as she assessed threat levels. Even Bloop's perpetual cheerfulness had been replaced by a focused intensity that reminded me these weren't just adorable alien pets. They were predators. Right, I said, trying to process this new development. So the cubs can actually fight. Their hunting instincts are fully developed, Ragnar confirmed. They simply lack the size and strength of adults, but in confined spaces, with the element of surprise, BMI could be incredibly effective, I finished. Okay, new plan. The next 20 minutes were the most terrifying and exhilarating of my life. We split into two groups. Ragnar took point using his warrior skills to engage the pirates directly, while I led the cubs through the maintenance tunnels I knew like the back of my hand. The pirates had done their homework. They knew about Kithara physiology, had come prepared with stun nets and containment fields specifically designed for the cubs' species. What they hadn't counted on was a human maintenance worker who knew exactly which power conduits to sabotage. Okay guys, I whispered to the cubs as we crawled through a service tunnel above the main corridor where a group of pirates was setting up some kind of scanning equipment. Remember what we practiced about teamwork? Pip chittered softly, his version of an evil laugh. I cut the power to their scanner just as Pip dropped through a ceiling panel onto the lead pirate's shoulders. The guy started screaming about attack cats while Pip rode him around like a furry clawed rodeo champion. Meanwhile, Zara had somehow gotten behind their group and was systematically chewing through their equipment cables with surgical precision. Bloop, not to be outdone, had discovered that pirates really don't like it when small, purring creatures start playing with their weapon power cells. There's something deeply unsettling about watching someone frantically try to stop a happy alien from accidentally turning their plasma rifle into a very expensive paperweight. "This is not in the tactical manual," one of the pirates wailed, as Pip bounced off his head and disappeared back into the ventilation system. By the time Ragnar caught up with us, we disabled 3 boarding parties and turned the main corridor into what could generously be described as a maintenance nightmare. Cables hung from the ceiling, emergency lighting flickered erratically, and there was a suspicious smell coming from what used to be the pirates' portable command center. "Impressive," Ragnar said, surveying the chaos. "You fight like a proper pack." "We're not done yet," I said, checking my handheld scanner. "There's still a group heading for the command center, and they've got some kind of heavy weapons." That's where things got interesting. The remaining pirates had barricaded themselves in the bridge, with Lieutenant Torres and the rest of the command crew as hostages. Standard siege situation, except for the part where they were demanding the cubs be delivered to them, or they'd start executing hostages. "We need a distraction," Ragnar mused, studying the bridge's layout on my scanner. "I've got an idea," I said, "but you're not going to like it." My plan was beautifully stupid in its simplicity. While Ragnar positioned himself for a frontal assault, I took the cubs into the station's main environmental control center. Every mining station has one. It's where all the life support, artificial gravity, and atmospheric processing gets managed. "Okay, kids," I said, pulling up the environmental controls. "Remember how you like to play with the gravity settings in my quarters?" 3 sets of violet eyes lit up with unholy glee. What followed was the most disorienting 10 minutes in the history of space combat. I cycled the bridge's gravity from 0 to double standard while strobing the lights and pumping the air recycling system with a mixture of cleaning chemicals that smelled like rotting fish. The pirates, who had been prepared for conventional resistance, were not prepared for a coordinated assault while floating helplessly in 0 gravity and gagging on artificial stench. When Ragnar burst through the emergency airlock, timing his entry for the exact moment I restored normal gravity, half of them were too disoriented to fight back. The other half were dealing with 3 very small, very angry Kithara cubs, who had somehow gotten into the bridge's ventilation system and were now dropping on them from above like furry nightmares. "Surrender," Ragnar announced calmly while standing over the pirate captain, who was being methodically groomed by Bloop in what had to be the most humiliating defeat in pirate history. The remaining pirates took one look at their leader being licked by an adorable alien kitten while his crew was being herded into a corner by 2 other cubs and a 7-foot warrior, and decided that maybe piracy wasn't for them after all. "Well," said Lieutenant Torres as security teams arrived to clean up the mess, "that was different." Commander Vex, who had spent the entire battle hiding in a storage closet, emerged to survey the aftermath. His recording device was somehow still running. "I suppose," he said slowly, "this does demonstrate effective pack cooperation." Ragnar and I exchanged another look, this time one of shared exhaustion and mutual respect. "Indeed," Ragnar said, "the human fights well alongside cobs. This is acceptable." High praise from a warrior culture, I gathered. The aftermath of what station records would officially call the pirate incident was a bureaucratic nightmare that somehow managed to be more exhausting than the actual fighting. Between security debriefs, damage assessments, and insurance claims, I barely had time to process what had just happened. The cubs, meanwhile, had become instant celebrities. Word had spread through the station about their role in defeating the pirates, and suddenly everyone wanted to meet the hero kittens. Pip was absolutely loving the attention, posing for photos and demonstrating his pirate riding technique to anyone who would watch. Zara was more reserved, but clearly pleased with the tactical analysis requests from security personnel. Even Bloop was enjoying his newfound fame, though he seemed confused about why everyone found his grooming of the pirate captain so amusing. "They're natural performers," I observed, watching Pip reenact the battle for a group of off-duty miners. "Eli are warriors," Ragnar corrected, but there was pride in his voice. "Small warriors, but warriors nonetheless." We were sitting in the station's observation lounge, watching the cubs hold court while the debris from the pirate ships was being cleared away. It had been 3 days since the attack, and we still hadn't resolved the custody situation. "So," I said finally, "what happens now? Do you take them back to your homeworld? Raise them in the traditional Kithara way?" Ragnar was quiet for a long moment, watching as Bloop tried to teach a human child how to purr. Among my people, there is an old saying, the pack chooses itself. We believed it referred only to blood bonds, to family lines passing down through generations. But watching you with the cubs, seeing how you fought for them, protected them, he paused. Perhaps we have been too narrow in our understanding. Commander Vex chose that moment to join us, looking even more frazzled than usual. His forearms were juggling multiple data pads and what appeared to be a very large cup of coffee. Fletcher, he announced, I have been in communication with Galactic Child Services, Kythara High Command, and Station Administration for the past 72 hours. The paperwork alone could fill a cargo hold. And, I asked, though I was already dreading the answer. Officially, the cubs are wards of the station pending final custody determination. Unofficially, Vex glanced at Ragnar, who nodded encouragingly. The Kythara High Command has agreed to recognize you as an honorary pack leader under their traditional law, provided, of course, that proper supervision is maintained. Supervision? Ragnar cleared his throat. I have requested transfer to this station. Permanent assignment. The cubs need guidance in their heritage, their culture. But they also need. He gestured at where I was absently handing Pip a spare bolt to play with, while the cub hung upside down from my shoulder. This what? Acceptance. Patience. The ability to find solutions that no one else would consider. Ragnar's scarred face actually managed something that might have been a smile. Very human traits. I looked over at the cubs. Zara had apparently convinced the security chief to show her the tactical displays and was offering suggestions on defensive improvements with the seriousness of a military advisor. Pip had gotten bored with his audience and was now attempting to disassemble a decorative plant holder, much to the horror of the maintenance staff. Bloop was still trying to teach purring lessons, with limited success but unlimited enthusiasm. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. You want to stay here, on this boring mining station, to help me raise your kids. Our cubs, Ragnar corrected. The pack has chosen. We honor that choice. Vex coughed diplomatically. There are, of course, conditions. Regular reports to both Kythara High Command and Galactic Child Services. Mandatory cultural education programs. Safety protocols for when the cubs reach adolescence and their hunting instincts fully mature. How fully mature are we talking? I asked nervously. Well, Vex consulted one of his data pads. According to Kythara biology texts, adolescent cubs have been known to hunt creatures up to, roughly the size of a small shuttle. Wonderful. But that's years away, Ragnar assured me. For now, they are simply cubs who need guidance, education, and... He watched as Pip successfully dismantled the plant holder and began rebuilding it into what appeared to be a tiny fortress. Someone to keep them from destroying the station. Great. So I've gone from maintenance worker to what, exactly? Pack leader, Ragnar said seriously. Guardian, teacher, he paused. Parent. The word hit me harder than I expected. Parent. I looked at the cubs again, really looked at them. Pip, with his boundless curiosity and complete disregard for safety regulations. Zara, with her careful intelligence and protective instincts. Bloop, with his infectious joy and ability to find wonder in everything. They weren't just alien creatures I'd accidentally become responsible for. They were kids. My kids. Well, I said finally, I guess I need to child-proof my quarters, and probably learn more about Kythara nutrition requirements, and figure out how to explain to them why they can't rewire the station's computer systems for fun. I will help with cultural education, Ragnar offered, teaching them about their heritage, their natural abilities, the hunting, the combat training when they are old enough. And I, Vex added with obvious reluctance, will handle the paperwork. All of it. Forever. At that moment, Pip came bounding over, his tiny fortress clutched in his arms and his violet eyes bright with excitement. He chittered something that my slowly improving understanding of cub communication translated roughly as, "Look what I built! Can we make a bigger one in your room?" Zara followed more sedately, but I could see the question in her eyes, the same one that had been there since the first day. Are we safe? Are we staying? Bloop just plopped down next to my feet and started purring, apparently content with whatever decision the adults made as long as everyone was happy. Yeah, I said, reaching down to scratch behind Pip's ears while Zara climbed into my lap. We can build a bigger fortress. Just, maybe not out of critical station components? Pip's disappointed chirp made it clear that I was taking all the fun out of construction projects, but he seemed willing to negotiate. "So," Ragnar said, watching this domestic scene with what I was learning to recognize as Kythara amusement, "you accept the responsibility. The permanent pack bond?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. 6 months ago, my biggest worry was whether the coffee machine would break down before my next paycheck. Now, I was contemplating a future of raising 3 apex predators who thought electrical systems were toys and considered my boots a food group. "You know what?" I said, as Bloop started that deep, rumbling purr that somehow made everything seem right with the universe. "Yeah, I accept." And that's how Marcus Fletcher, certified mediocre maintenance worker, became the galaxy's most unlikely parent to 3 alien cubs, who could probably take down a grown Terran bear if they put their minds to it. Commander Vex was right about one thing. The paperwork was going to be a nightmare. But watching Pip attempt to teach Ragnar his tactical fortress-building techniques, while Zara offered earnest suggestions for improvement, and Bloop provided moral support in the form of enthusiastic purring, I realized I could live with that. After all, how hard could it be to raise 3 adorable alien predators? I had a feeling I was going to find out.